Alrighty. So, that's what we're going to be studying over the next few weeks. The idea of one another, okay? Now, I will tell you, this book, I don't think, it might not be actually on the pages. One Another Christianity. It's written by a brother named Heath Rogers. I'll tell you, if you go and buy this book, be careful because Heath and the other writers for One Stone Publications are of the non-institutional branch, which they and I don't agree on some things. But we're still brothers, and this book is really, really good. So if you want that, it's called One Another Christianity. I'll give you the web address if you'd like to purchase the entire book. But anyways, what are some of the ways that some of the illustrations or pictures that the Bible uses for Christians in the church? We just read Romans 12, 4 and 5, and talks about many members, same function, but there's not really an illustration there. Well, I guess there is in that last verse. We form one body, right? But what are some other illustrations of the different ways in which Christians work together? Can you think of some? Somebody grab John 15, verse 5. John 15, verse 5. All right, so what's that illustration? He's the vine and we're the branches, right? Now, a lot of people will say that that's different churches are the branches, but who's he talking to? Is he talking to different churches? He's probably, well, let's back up. Verse 22 of chapter 14, Judas speaks up. Judas was one of the what? What was Judas? He's one of the disciples, right? Chapter 14, verse 8, Philip speaks up. What was Philip? One of the disciples. Chapter 14, verse 5, Thomas speaks up. Well, who was Thomas? One of the disciples, right? So he's talking to the disciples, and at that time, who are the followers of Jesus? The disciples, right? So he's talking to the individual people who would then become part of the church, and he says, "You're the vine, and I'm the vine, and you're the branches." What does that mean? What's that picture that he's using there? What's he trying to illustrate? Yeah, everything branches off of him, right? Everything comes from him. We all go back to one source, if it will, right? All right, 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 5 says that we're living stones in a spiritual house. So what's that illustration? That we're part of we're each a brick on the house of God, right? And the house of God is what? The church. All right? Somebody get Galatians chapter, well, let's do Ephesians chapter 2, verse 19. Ephesians 2, verse 19. All right, so we're fellow citizens. What's that illustration? Citizens in what? In a kingdom, right? Okay, so we're the branches, we're the spiritual stones, we're members of the body. Romans chapter 12 says, Romans chapter 12 says that we're part of the body. 1 Corinthians chapter 12 says that each part of the body has its own specific function, and then it talks about the eye and the ear and the nose and so forth, right? Okay, so we have all of these illustrations. Now, what's the one thing that kind of unites that? If you're the branches and he's the vine, we all come off of him, right? If we're the stones and he's the chief cornerstone, does anybody know, has anybody ever laid masonry at all? I have, not very well. I can do it. It'll probably stand up, just don't run into it too hard. Okay, so if you have a chief cornerstone, say you're going to build this building, right, and it's going to be brick walls, and the weight is going to be supported by the brick, you're going to have one corner, really all of the corners, are going to have a giant footing, right? Like if you're going to build a house, any kind of house, you're going to build a footing. All the corners and then all of the main weight distribution centers are going to have a footing there. He's the chief cornerstone. So he's the one, in essence, they would put the chief cornerstone in the most likely place for it to sink. Okay? So if we're all the bricks and he's the chief cornerstone, we're all built off of him, right? All right, if we're the body and he's the head, he's the one that controls the body. So all of these illustrations go back to one specific thing, and that is that we all come from who? Christ, right? He's the head, he's the chief cornerstone, he's the vine, and so forth. But, think about this, okay? Look at, go back to Romans chapter 12. We read verses 4 and 5. But look at verse number 3. Romans chapter 12, verse 3. By the grace given to me, I say to everyone among you, not to think of himself more highly than he ought to think, but to think with sober judgment, each according to the measure of faith that God has assigned. For as in one body we have many members, and the members do not all have the same function, so we, though many, are one body in Christ and individually members of one another. Having gifts that differ according to the grace given to us, let us use them. If prophecy, in proportion to our faith. If service, in our serving. To the ones who teaches, in his teaching. The one who exhorts, in his exhortation. The one who contributes, in generosity. The one who leads, with zeal. The one who does acts of mercy, with cheerfulness. Okay, now wait a second. That list of things, what's the first thing? He says we all have different gifts, right? But then he says, what's the first gift that he mentions? Prophecy. What are some of the other gifts that he mentions? Do what? Service? Teaching? What are some other ones? Service, teaching, exhortation. What does exhortation mean? Do what? Yeah, encouraging. All right. What about contributes? What's that? Sometimes your part in the church is, I can't do a whole lot, but I got some money in the bank. That sounds pretty rough, doesn't it? But that's what Paul said. So anyways, okay. What about one who leads with zeal? The one who does acts of mercy or benevolence. You're helping people with cheerfulness. The first one is miraculous. We don't have that one anymore, right? But he just called it a gift. Now, he called all those other things gifts as well, didn't he? So he's using gifts there to talk about the miraculous and the non-miraculous. What are some other non-miraculous gifts that you might have? You have encouragement. Since he's not here, I'll talk about him. Have y'all ever seen when Ron cleans the building? Has anybody ever been here when Ron cleans the building? It's interesting. Okay, during quarantine, well, I guess last month, Ron came up here and said, I'm going to clean the baptistry. And I said, okay. After 2.5 hours, we were still cleaning the baptistry. And then he said, it's still not done. And I said, Ron, you go home. I'll clean it tomorrow. We'll finish it up. It's fine. When Ron cleans the building, that closet back there, every time it's organized, it's because Ron cleaned beforehand. He takes everything out and he organizes everything. Okay, so there's other ways that you can serve the church without the miraculous endowment of the Holy Spirit, right? Okay, so what he's saying is, we're all part of this group. We all have our different points. But here's the thing, okay? Look at verse number 3 again. For by the grace given to me, I say to everyone among you, not to think of himself more highly than he ought to think, but to think sober judgment, each according to the measure of faith that God has assigned. So, the measure of faith. Now, what is faith? I've had a lot of conversations. Listen, y'all have heard about the infamous app called TikTok, right? I downloaded that app, and I started getting followers, and then I started talking about the Bible, and then I started having a lot of conversations over the last 2 days about the word faith. What is faith? What is faith? Yeah, the actual answer. Like what the Bible really says. All right? It is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. What does that mean, though? It means, who's seen an angel? Nobody. How do I know angels exist? Because of faith, right? It's the substance of things hoped for. I've never seen heaven, but I know it exists, and I'm excited about it. It's my substance because of my faith. So faith is understanding what the gospel has said about things, right? Can you have faith and not be obedient? Any person who falls from the gospel, anyone who falls from grace, anyone who leaves the church, if faith is the understanding of the gospel, can you have faith and not be obedient? They know, they just don't care anymore, or they've turned their back on it or whatever, right? Now, can you have real biblical saving faith without obedience? No. Okay? So, what he's saying here in verse 3 is, each one of us has, even though we all have to have faith in order to be saved, right? Hear, believe, repent, confess, and be baptized. Even though we all have to have faith to actually live righteous lives, each one of us has a different amount or measure of faith. Now, is that okay? Does everyone have to understand and have the same amount of zeal as every single other Christian? No, but we should all be striving to have the most amount, right? We should be striving to have it fullness, right? What were you saying?
No, I think as far as that, and then feel like everybody has to have the same thing. Obviously, no, because we can all come to the same belief and obedience where I might just, I read it, that's enough for me, I believe it, I'll act on it, I never question it. And someone else might need to study and see evidence, like an apologetics press type.
Mm-hmm.
To see all the scientific research
Yeah.
they've done that backs up the same thing I believe. And then I go, oh, okay, now.
Yeah.
Now I feel more.
We've all heard the person that says, well, the Bible says it, so I believe it. To me, I'm the type of person that says, yeah, but what if the Bible's wrong? Right? That's why when I was first coming to the knowledge of the truth and about to obey the gospel, I don't know if I've ever told you all this. I grew up in Pentecostalism, and so I had this mindset of the miraculous still happens today. And so Dalton showed me Ephesians 4, 1 Corinthians 13, that which is perfect will come, that which is in part will be done away. I wrote a 12-page paper on how people can be perfect because I thought it meant Jesus. And he handed me that thing back. And teachers, you think that y'all are mean to your students sometime with a lot of red ink? I think he just dipped it in red ink. Anyways, but every person has not only a different level of, I need more evidence, like you were saying, or some people never have problems with their faith at all, right? The Bible says to go to church, so I go to church. And then some of us, the Bible says to go to church, but man, I really just don't feel like going to church today, right? Okay, so there's these different levels of faith. Is that okay? Yes. Do we need to just stay there? No. We need to keep growing, right? But that's the point of this idea of being part of one another, all right? Look at Ephesians chapter 4, verse 25. All right, if faith is the understanding of the gospel at its ground level, the understanding of the gospel that then fills in gaps when we don't understand things, that fills in gaps when we don't know things, objectively. No one can scientifically study an angel or heaven or so forth, right? If that's faith, look at Ephesians chapter 4, verse 25. Therefore, having put away falsehood, let each one speak the truth of what? Truth of the gospel, right? Speak the truth of the gospel with his neighbor, for we are all members one of another. What does it mean to be members one of another? I think that's even one of your questions one of the thought questions. Yeah, question number 1. Is there a difference in being a member somewhere, or at a church, and being members of one another? We talked about Romans 12, we talked about 1 Corinthians 12, we talked about John 5, and all these things. We build each other up. We're part of this group that builds each other up, okay? What's the difference in being members somewhere and being members one of another? Is it possible to be a member of a congregation and not members one of another in the congregation? Yeah. A lot of people that come regularly every Sunday, unless there's a pandemic, and they give, and that's about it. Right? They're faithful because what do we usually use as a barometer of faithfulness? If you sit on a pink pew on Sundays and Wednesdays, you're faithful. And then if Gus at the end of the year gives you a piece of paper that recounts every penny that you've given to the church that year, then you're faithful as long as it reaches X amount of dollars, right? Okay, so that's our general barometer of faithfulness. But is that being members one of another? What's the difference there? Right. Yeah, y'all know Michael makes fun of me a lot when I go hunting because I'm going to fall down at some point, like every single time. But I went dove hunting Saturday and I didn't fall down one time, Michael. Anyways, I did get soaking wet though. So, all right, if you sprain your right ankle and you don't get, it's not bad enough to get crutches and all that stuff, okay? You sprain your right ankle. 3 days later, what's going to start hurting because you're hobbling on your right ankle? Your left ankle. Why? Because your left ankle is making up for the right ankle, right? Same concept. We're part of the body, and so being members one of another, your ankles are both members of one of another, right? And so they take over a little bit. The best illustration is internal organs. What are the internal organs that we have 2 of? We have 2 kidneys. All right, if you lose 1 kidney, can you survive? Yes, right? Same concept, right? All right, so we're members of one another, and because of that, what does Ephesians 4:25 say we need to do? Notice, when we always talk about speaking the truth in love, what are we usually talking about? If you're going to speak the truth in love, what do you usually think of when you think that term? Yeah. Evangelism is what I think of, right? If I think about speaking the truth in love, I think evangelism. Like, there's sometimes when you just need to be a little bit softer in evangelism. Now, this past week, with all these conversations I've been having, one of the guys that decided that he used some strong language. He called me a heretic and all this other stuff. All right. I answered him a little differently than I did rest of the people. Why? Because sometimes you just need to be a little bit more forceful when you're evangelizing, when you're teaching people, right? Now, that being the case, what is Ephesians 4 talking about? We usually think about speaking the truth in love when it's talking about approaching sin, evangelizing, talking to someone who's lost. Is that what Ephesians 4:25 is talking about? Having put away falsehood, let each one of you speak the truth with his neighbor, for we are members one of another. Now, who's neighbor there? Who's the neighbor? Is it everybody in the world, your literal neighbor who lives next door to you that goes to blank church or doesn't go to church at all? Is that your neighbor in Ephesians 4:25? Are you members one of another with your neighbor? No, who are you members one of another with? People in the church, right? So he's talking about speaking the truth in love to each other. Be angry, do not sin, verse 26. Do not let the sun go down in your anger. Do not give opportunities for the devil. Let the thief no longer steal, so forth. He's talking about how we treat each other. We're speaking the truth in love. We're understanding that we're members one of another. All right, now let's go back to Let's go back to 1 Corinthians chapter 12. All right? Hurricane Sally's outside, you hear her? All right, 1 Corinthians chapter 12, we're going to read verse 12. For just as the body is one and has many members, and all the members of the body, though many, are one body, so it is with Christ. For in one Spirit we were all baptized into one body, Jews and Greeks, slaves and free, for all were made to drink of one Spirit. For the body does not consist of one member, but of many. That the foot should say, because I'm not a hand, I do not belong to the body, that would not make it any less a part of the body. There, he's talking about the people that don't feel like they're part of the body. They just feel like they don't fit in. Doesn't mean you're any less of the body, right? All right, now, this book, this is a workbook, and I have the teacher's book. I want to read to you, I don't guess this is a poem. This is just, well, I guess it is a poem. Depends on how you define a poem, I guess. I want to read to you this poem in this teacher's book. Are you ready? If everyone else attended services just like I do, what would the attendance be? Would we have Sunday evening services or a midweek Bible study or a prayer meeting? If everyone else gave like I do, what would the contribution be? Not in the amount given, but in the amount of sacrifice shown by the offering. If everyone else practiced hospitality like me, how often would others be served and shown love? If everyone else tried to help restore those who have left the church to the same degree as I do, how much effort would be expended on trying to bring them back to God? If everyone else demonstrated the same willingness to show that I show to teach Bible classes, what kind of teaching program would this church have? If everyone else reached out with the gospel to the lost at the level I do, how many souls would be saved? How much food would be taken to the sick? How often would the lonely be visited? How many prayers would be offered for those who ask? So that's what we're talking about in this study. We're going to go through a lot of different ideas and passages and concepts of the one another throughout the Bible. We're going to talk about, almost everything. Serving one another and how we encourage one another, honoring one another, forgiveness, hospitality, and so forth. So, when we do this, we need to remember we're trying to be members one of another and not just members, right? Now, is there anything inherently sinful with just being a member of the congregation? Well, think about this, okay? How many, I don't know the exact answer, so you're guessing just like I am. Of all the people mentioned, I just bit my tongue really hard. Okay. Of all the people mentioned in the Bible, how many do you think are mentioned in the New Testament? I don't know the answer, okay? But it's a lot, right? You got Romans 16 where he mentions like 15 people all at once. And you got passages in, really at the end of a lot of the epistles where he does the same thing. So let's say let's be really generous. Say there's 250 people that are mentioned in the New Testament as being active participants in the gospel during the first century church. How many Christians were there in the first century church? Conservative estimates say that there were probably around 50,000 to 100,000 at the end of the first century. So, about the same amount of people as are members of the church in the United States. And we only know the names and the actions of maybe 250. Realistically, it's probably less than 100 that we know things that they did, right? So the vast majority of Christians were members of the body of Christ, but they weren't so active as to have their name recorded in the New Testament. Of that, do you think there were people who were not members of one another just yet because they were still growing, they were still trying to figure it out? Also, the fact that they were part of the church, but they really couldn't be super active because there was some consequences back then that we don't have today, which were what? Persecution, right? Death. So there were, I mean, just like logically thinking, there were a lot of people in the first century that were members, but they needed to grow further. That's why the books are written. The first century, the epistles are written, right? Because they need to grow further. They need to become members one of another. All right, let's do thought question number 2. Are you ready? Read Ephesians 4, 1 through 3. Explain these three words, or these words and phrases. All right, let's go over there. Ephesians chapter 4, verses 1 through 3. So, this isn't something new. I think a lot of times we think that the church is in such bad shape today. And listen, it's not in the best shape. But it wasn't in the best shape that the first century was either, right? We always talk about we want to be the church of the first century. Y'all ever heard that? We just want to do what they did in the first century. What were some of the things that they did in the first century that we don't want to do? Have affairs with your stepmom. Keep food from one another at fellowship meals because you don't like each other. Go to the authorities and tell the government that Brooke is a Christian so that she can be put in jail because I don't like Brooke. Okay. We're trying to be the way the Bible wanted the early church to be, right? If that's one thing, one kind of quibble that someone said one time that has always stuck with me. They said, what's so special about the Church of Christ? And I said, we try to be the church that you read about in the Bible. And he was like, well, man, they had a lot of things messed up about them, didn't they? And I said, okay, we try to be the church that the Bible was trying to encourage them to be. Okay? All right, let's go to Ephesians 4, 1 through 3. I'm going to read these and then we'll I'll let you all define them. Ready? Ephesians 4. I, therefore, a prisoner of the Lord, urge you to walk in a manner worthy of the calling to which you have been called, with all humility and gentleness. There we go. With patience, bearing with one another in love, eager to maintain the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. All right, now, what does it mean to walk worthy in Ephesians 4, 1 through 3? Walk in a manner worthy of the calling with which you have been called. To which you have been called. What does it mean to walk worthy? Look at verse 2. He defines it. Here's how you walk worthy. Have humility and gentleness and patience. Bear one another with love. Maintain the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. All right, what does it mean to be lowly? That means let everybody run over you at every notice, right? Anytime anybody wants to take advantage of you, just let them take advantage of you. Is that true? No. What does it mean to be lowly? Yeah. Yeah. Have humility, right? And he's using a different translation than I am, so of course there's a little breakup here. All right, gentleness. What does it mean to be gentle? That means never, ever, ever be assertive at all. Because Jesus was gentle. He also stood in the corner and made a whip and drove those folks out of the temple as fast as they could run, right? Now, gentleness is what he talks about there later on in chapter 4. That we're going to speak the truth in love, that we're going to encourage more than we're going to rebuke, right? All right, bearing one another with love, so forth, endeavoring to keep the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. What does it mean? What is the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace? That's a really biblical term, isn't it? Phrase. Unity of the Spirit. All right, let's break it down. What does it mean to have the unity of the Spirit? We're all called by the Spirit, right? Through the gospel. So we're going to be unified on that. Can we have differences of opinions when it comes to certain things in the Bible? Yeah. Me and Heath, who wrote this book, disagree on some, I don't say fundamental, but some kind of extracurricular opinions, right? In fact, one of his books is all about how you shouldn't have a fellowship hall. Guess what we have? A fellowship hall. Guess what we'll do when we go, if I ever meet him in person? We'll go eat. Not at a church building. Okay? So, you can have differences and still be in unity of the Spirit. Unity of the Spirit just means that we understand that we're both Christians, we're both saved, and we're both brothers, right? And the bond of peace. The peace is what brings us together, not how upset we are at each other because of sin or so forth, or perceived sin or something like that, right? All right, thought question number 3. As with most Bible subjects, simply talking about being members one of another is not enough. How can we apply this principle to our lives together? How can we apply this principle of being members one of another to our lives together? Not just talking about the people in this room, because if you look around, the people in this room, you know, preachers have we have certain terms that we use, you know, like the faithful few and the gold stock and so forth. I've heard those two terms a lot. Faithful few is the people that come to Sunday afternoons or evenings and Wednesday nights. Why? Because they're striving more, they're working more, right? So this is a Wednesday night, so we understand that, and it's during a pandemic, so there's a lot of people that aren't here that usually are here on Wednesday nights. But how can we strive to be members one of another with not just the faithful few, but with the entire congregation? How can we live out this principle? What are some ways? What are some ways that we could do better with it? Check on them, call them. Don't get within 6 feet unless you got your mask on. Check on them, call them, pray for them. That's one thing, right? Pray for them. Let them know you're praying for them. When you see them on Sunday, don't just ask, did they see the Braves game last week? Or when does it start? Next Saturday, right? Don't just ask them if they saw Alabama win last night, right? Ask them how they're doing. And don't let them just say the old Christian way of, yeah, we're doing good. We're doing good. My house fell in last night because a tree fell on it, but I'm not going to tell nobody. And I lost my job last week. We're doing good, right? Actually get to know them, right? All righty. So, as we go through this, it kind of gives us some more, it kind of gives us homework every now and then. I want to read this last paragraph, and then we'll take our break before we offer the invitation. In this series, we're going to study about making everyone feel a part of the group, making every member an active, working, growing member, having no divisions in the body, caring for one another, and bearing each other's burdens, having fun together, enjoying each other's company, being best friends, meeting everyone's needs, spiritual, moral, financial, and emotional, and breaking down any barriers that might exist. All right, so that's what we're going to do over the next however many weeks it takes to go through this. I think this book has 13 weeks. We have 16 weeks until the first of the year. So we might sprinkle in a couple one-off studies here and there, right? All right, let's take a little break, and then we're going to offer the invitation as we usually do on Wednesday nights here in just a second.